Right, good evening everyone. Hoping you can hear me well enough. First of all, welcome to this fabulous cathedral in the heart of the city of Coventry, which our university and hospital are really proud to call home. And I really believe it's a fitting venue in which we have come to celebrate Professor Liz Deutsch's achievements tonight. A big thank you to the cathedral for allowing us to use this space tonight. Being conferred as a professor is the pinnacle of an academic career. And I think one of the great traditions and fun traditions associated with this is the inaugural lecture. Here you have the unique opportunity to present to your family, friends, colleagues, collaborators and members of the public the work that you've done to bring you to this point in your career. And it's fantastic to see that you've come here tonight, and a big thank you to you too for actually making the effort to come and listen to Liz this evening. Liz has been conferred with the title of Professor of Nursing and Practice, building on a lifetime career in that profession. She is core to the Centre for our Centre for Care Excellence for Nursing, Midwifery and Allied Health, which we developed 6 years ago now in partnership with, and I'll give it the full title, University Hospitals, Coventry and Warwickshire, NHS England Trust, which we otherwise know as UHCW, which is a lot easier. The focus of this centre is to promote excellence across research, innovation, practice and education. And we do this in common with a lot of our centres at Coventry University through co-creation of solutions with the end users of our research, and that's a real critical part to it. And I think the unique focus of our centre is one of the reasons that Liz was persuaded to leave Birmingham after 20 years and join us here. And she's been in this professorial post now for just over a year. Our partnership with UHCW is extremely special, and together the two organisations work to support new generations of health professionals and cutting-edge research to improve the health and well-being of our local communities. The concept of bench to bedside is integral to this, making sure that new knowledge makes a difference in the here and now. Liz is one of the relatively few, sadly, clinical academics outside medicine, but we're trying our best to make more of them. She is a part of a new generation that are seeking to break the mould. Clinical academics apply a unique combination of skills drawn from their expertise in clinical work and combining them with evidence-based practice and research. So we're here to celebrate her achievements during her 34 years of nursing and research practice, within which she sought to strengthen those interconnections between research, clinical practice, those interconnections between research and clinical practice. Friends say Liz has incredible energy, can bend time and is quick-witted, and she's certainly determined and relishes the chance to break down barriers and do things differently. And I'm sure that by the time we leave tonight, we'll have learned something new, and hopefully with a feeling that anything is achievable. So thank you very much, and I'll hand over now to the star of this evening, Liz.
Good evening, everyone. How's that sounding for you all? Is that good? I like to be heard. So, as has been said, a very warm welcome. I do just want to add a couple of points to that warm welcome. First of all, that there are people out there in the audience tonight that have travelled very long distances. We have Sylvia Richards and Karen who've travelled a very long way from Hereford with their own driver, which is fabulous to see you here. We've got Peter Dine. We've also got people who've come from Leeds, Manchester, Dorset, Wales, Liverpool, and if I've missed anybody, I do apologise. It really makes me feel very at home that people would do that to me. You know, you meet a lot of people in the course of your practice, and you think you're boring. If your name's Liz, you think, what I do is boring. and they say, what is a clinical academic, or what's the Centre for Care Excellence? But tonight, I feel like the very presence of you here means that quite a lot of you actually get it. So, with no further ado, my plan is to talk through 3 distinct phases, and I've been given the privilege of nearly an hour to do that. I promise to make it interesting and lively, and you'll have to forgive me if some of the stories are a little raw. So the first story this evening is my story, a little unusual for an inaugural lecture, but it's my story, and I share it because I want you to know why I chose to call this Breaking the Mould. So back in 1965, I know I look 21, thank you, but back in 1965 I was left by my birth mother by the side of a road near to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham, not so far from here, hence the name Elizabeth, or commonly known to my friends as Lizzie, and any other nickname they wish to call me. And just so that the reference is here, I then inherited the lifetime label of being a foundling. And it doesn't really matter most of the time, but you'll see how painful it can be when you're trying to make transitions in life, that even when I applied for the job here in Coventry, the secretary that took my birth certificate to photocopy it looked like she'd seen a ghost. So you never lose it. And I've tried to make the very best of my life. I have tried to make it that it was worthwhile being put on the planet, albeit one great big accident that I clearly am, however tragic the circumstances. However, having been put on this planet and having a bit of go in me, I really sometimes still wonder. I have self-doubt, and I sometimes, despite standing up here this evening, don't always have the confidence people would assume. Not only was I a foundling, I then went through a period where I didn't walk, I couldn't walk, I face planted if I tried to walk, which meant that I was unadoptable in the eyes of social care at the time. And they basically said, well, no one's going to want a disabled child. But my doggedly determined foster mother, there are other names, but she was very doggedly determined throughout the whole of her life, would do some quite unique things to get me to walk. Lots of physio. You can see I've got a very wide gait here, and however cute I look, apparently if I move forward I would just face plant. So that's the way it was, and I was unadoptable and left in foster care. But I could talk. I could really talk, and I can still talk today. And apparently my vocabulary, aged 2.5, was equivalent, sorry brother, to his vocabulary, aged about 4. And that comparison has been put, we've always been in competition, and that comparison is in many care records, that Liz can talk. And they describe me as a sturdy little girl. I think that means big, but politely put. So that's the position I was in. And then, of course, they decided to try and guess my date of birth. And that's because at the point at which I was found, I was estimated to be between 6 weeks and 2 months of age, which is highly unusual, even to this day, that somebody would keep a baby for that length of time and then decide to part company. So one would assume it was quite tragic. But what was tragic even more was that up until the age of 16, 18, my foster dad, who was the most unassuming, quiet, easygoing family man, really felt angry about that. I had 3 birthdays at one point, and please don't think this is a joke. I had the 11th of June, I had the 24th of June, which is my husband's birthday, so I celebrate unashamedly both, and expect presents on both occasions. And then, of course, there was an August birthday, which was completely hideous, because I was left in August, so what were they doing? And so they mucked about for a couple of years, deciding to give me a birth certificate. And this is my genuine birth certificate. It's not worth the paper it's written on. And I think what you have to realise is with this, it isn't a story of sorrow. It's a story of understanding how I have crafted me. I have no identity at times, but through the help of long-lost family, born without a trace, and their genealogists and their researchers, and accessing a wonderful group of people, over the last year, instead of my husband saying to me, "Oh my goodness me, where do you come from?" And he'll often say that when he's exasperated. I have that identity. We have found my birth mother, and were she alive today, she would be 97. But my dad, you know, foster dad, said, well, it's really disgusting that you can't get a passport. So at 18, I couldn't get a passport. I didn't exist. And we went to London together, and Dad didn't even own a suit. He bought a suit, he donned a suit, he bought a attaché case, and he dragged me off kicking and screaming with a flask of tea and a pack of sandwiches. We're going to go to the passport office. Well, if you'd met him, you wouldn't believe he'd got it in him to be as determined as he was that day. And he sat with me and he went, we're not moving. Don't you move. And I didn't move. And we waited for that lady in the passport office who kept opening her hatch, looking at me, shutting her hatch. And then eventually she went, I'm closing. He said, well, I'm not moving. And then she issued what we call a short form or a 12-month passport. And from that, I've been able to get all of my passports ever since. But her parting gift, as we left the passport office, was, make sure you get your birth certificate sorted out next time. Good luck with that. So I've put up with unfathomable bureaucracy. I have put up with meanness and cruelness. I have most definitely felt ostracised at times, and I have broken my way through that mould. And then, in line with looking for my birth mother, I shut this in a box for nearly 30 years. I couldn't bear to look at it. I felt ashamed of it. I felt that I had no identity. But in 2020, I applied to go onto the programme. And I didn't really want to go on the programme, sorry Claire, but I didn't. I actually wanted just to sit in a corner and find the information out and hide. But then I thought, this is social history. We need to share this social history. We need to share the messages. And so I sent freedom of information for my records, and my delightful husband said, you've got a delivery. Really? I haven't ordered anything. Honestly, I haven't been on Amazon. He went, no, you've got a delivery. There's 5 boxes. What? These are my care records for every week of my life up until the age of 16. And whilst rooting through these heavily redacted, someone's got something to hide, records, I found a sentence that rooted me to the spot. And I found it in front of the camera crew and team when they were in the house filming me. And it was just a point at which I couldn't believe I'd read it. And it said, age 14, it's very unfortunate that although Liz was actually fit for adoption, age 3, she remained a child in waiting. Forgotten to the care system, with no real parents to call her own, and no parents who wished to adopt her. Now, enough said, we're going to lighten the spirit. I want you to know that on behalf of baby Elsa, who has recently been in the news with 2 siblings, that this has not stopped. I'm old, it's social history, but baby Elsa is 1 year old. And they're offering a £20,000 award. And they use a word I've been criticised for using, which is dumped. I've been told off many times for using the word I've dumped. And try to put a more positive spin on it. I say I was relinquished. I was given up. But there is a huge state of uncertainty to this day, and this poor baby has no birthday the same as me, has no belonging the same as me, and I really wanted to change. And so we wait until 2013, and you think, wow, 2013, you could actually stay at home with your foster parents, they would get paid, and you could go off to college like a normal child. When I was 16, my mother told me to find a job, go and get work. You've got to earn your keep, because the money stopped coming in. And that's when you realise that as much as they tried to bring you up, that actually it was a contractual, conditional agreement. And I want to change that. So in my lifetime, beyond my nursing career, I really want to become a big ambassador for cared for children who, for whatever their circumstances, need education. And I went off and I educated myself. And there was no attempt at bragging here. I went to nursing school, I went and did a degree, I then went on from that and did, stupidly, 2 master's degrees. We'll discuss that over a glass of wine. And then I went on, as you know, and did a PhD. I never wanted to do a PhD In fact, I'd rather have stuck pins in my eyes than done a PhD. But what I did want to do was break that mould that I am worth being on this planet. My brother once said to me, if that's what you've got to do, oh my God, where am I going to be? So what I would say to you is, at this junction of the lecture, before I change and switch, is that determination, age 16, with parents that were continually at war and with nowhere to go, determination was my friend, and nursing was my opportunity. And as a friend said recently, who's written a wonderful book, it isn't that you leave the care system, it's the care system leaves you. So thank you. I will now move on. I decided to go into nursing for the most unusual of reasons, and shame on me if you like, but one of the main reasons I went into nursing was that you've got a room, you've got a small salary and a wage at the time, and you've got excellent training, and I thought, well, I could do that. I can organise, I can definitely do that. And so I went ahead and decided to train at Dudley Group of Hospitals, which was a group of 6 hospitals. And the reason why I went there was very simple. I thought, if I don't like one, I'll move to another. I always had this feeling of needing to move, and that's what I did throughout my training. And on my very first ward, well, I didn't half make a mess of things. So I'm an organiser. I like to be organised. And I was watching the nurses clean the dentures. I thought, oh, come on, I can do that quicker. So I gathered up all of the dentures for all 9 of my patients. I popped them in a suitable receptacle. I trotted off to the area where we washed teeth. Does anybody know what's coming next? And instead of spending 20 minutes refitting patients' teeth so they could have their breakfast, I spent 5.5 hours trying to match the pairs. And you know what? You don't do that twice. So am I a natural nurse? Absolutely not. But do I care about my patients and care what I do? Absolutely yes. And Wordsley Hospital served me proud. This was called United Midlands College, and as you can see, it's a very small nursing group. There were 14 girls and 2 boys. We had a cracking time. We were young, we were free, we were wild, really. I suppose I wasn't, of course. And I remember thinking, well, these skirts, they're all a little doll. They're mid-calf. And I was present with a pair of scissors and said to my mates, how about I chop them all off? She said, well, Liz, if you chop off one dress, you're going to have to do 14 sets. Not a problem. So I chopped off 14 sets of dresses. So I took them all a wee bit shorter. And the lady came in, the head nurse, bird's nest hairdo, gigantic glasses, scary, with her ruler. And we lined up for inspection. And she said, well, rulers don't lie. What's happening? I never said a word, my colleagues never said a word, but the sewing room got a rocket. So, you know, I've always been a little naughty, I openly admit that. I did then eventually escape unscathed throughout the remainder of my nurse training, and on the day of my final results, which was the February 1991, 9 of the nurses in my set continued onto a nursing career. 1 failed their finals and just didn't resit. 4 went straight into midwifery training, absolutely not for me, and 2 retrained immediately into medicine. And the reason for that is because it was the most awful time. My group, there wasn't a single job for us. You've done 3.5 years training, your hopes are high, no jobs. And that was just absolutely unbelievable. And then they came back and said, we've got 1 job. Right, I'm going for that job. And all 9 of us went for the job, plus a lot of nurses from other hospitals. And I wasn't sure whether I even wanted the job at this point. It felt far too competitive. But I'm very proud to say that I got that job. And of course, it was a difficult time. We would walk into work, they would throw eggs at us across the picket line. Nurses had their pay bands written on their hat, well, they were called grades then. And the ground that we walked on, we were absolutely hated because we were so keen, and they were like, we are so fed up, we've not been given the money we want. So at this point, I make another switch, and I wish to thank, for the record, Miss Joan Price for showing me how to polish my brown shoes, tell me the length of my skirt, and make sure I turned up every morning on time. I'd also like to thank Miss Delamore, Mrs. Delamore. Delamore was a character. she used to take us off to the sluice, and just before lunch she would take the lid off a bedpan and say, "What's that?" I'd say, "Poo." She said, "That's right, Liz. What about the poo?" "Oh, please, can you put it in?" She had steaming bedpans full of poo, and she loved it, and she was the most wonderful teacher. You'll never forget that, because she never conducted her lessons in the classroom. She conducted her lessons in the sluice. And so I believe she encouraged me to look beyond the obvious. She encouraged me not to be scared, to be a nurse, and to be proud of being a nurse. So during this part of tonight's lecture, I'm going to wrap it up just a little bit, and I'm going to tell you about, not so many naughty stories, but stories that have shaped my career. And they are sliding doors because they were just so quiet, I didn't always know they were happening. You know what they say, is it accident or is it design? And I believe a lot of what I've done is accident. So I started my work at Russell Hall Hospital here. This is the new bit. You see, I was in the old bit, and my first job was on this haematology ward, and we had a young, dying gentleman one day. Sadly, most of the patients that died on that ward were under the age of 35. They had acute myeloid leukemia, acute lymphatic leukemia. They were not going to do very well. They were reverse barrier nurse, which means they were inside wards, and we had to dress up so we didn't give them any coughs or colds, and they were stuck in those side wards for months on end. And one morning I walked in for shift, and I heard this screaming, the most penetrating sound, and it was a gentleman screaming while he had his mouth cleaned by the sister. And she said, "You can go in there and finish that." And she was using bleach. And she was using dilute bleach. Yes, someone's just put their hands on that, exactly. And she was using liquid paraffin to keep the lips nice and moist. I couldn't do it. I said, "He's screaming." She said, "He's dying." I said, "He's screaming." And it was the moment where you didn't have computers, you didn't have Mr. Google or Mr. Yahoo. I went off to the library and I got myself a journal. I had to go through the index card. I know some of you will not know what I'm talking about. But at this point, there I am with an index card. And I decided to ring the dental hospital. And I said, "Give us a clue. What do we do?" And they faxed me an article. Can you imagine? The fax machine goes off. There I am with a fax machine, having been to the library, with my faxed copy. And it told me what was the best evidence. I cleaned that gentleman's mouth until the day he died, and he didn't scream once. So that's where I believe, although it's nothing amazingly huge, it made a big difference. What I'd like to ask you at this stage is a bit of audience participation. I'd like you to give me a moment of your thoughts. You may keep them to yourselves if you wish, but what were you doing 37 years ago? What were you doing when I went into nursing? Now, if you're younger than 37, please be quiet. But actually, what I want you to do is think about your key decisions, if you can remember them, and maybe how they've shaped your life. Because that's what you're listening to with me. How that key decision with a UCAS booklet on my own, zero parental guidance, making my decision to become a nurse. And then I moved on to Selly Oak Hospital, and this is the exact block I was in. It's an archived photo. Apologies that the quality's not great. I was on the top floor. It was an elderly care ward. It is probably the best and the worst ward I've ever been on. You could jump from bed to bed. The beds were so close. There were 36 beds. The nursing staff were very thin on the ground, and we delivered the most exceptional nursing care. We sat with our patients, we fed our patients, we talked to our patients. We didn't leave our patients if they were dying, and I just couldn't wait to go back to work. I was an absolute workaholic. I would take any agency shifts there were. It was fabulous. I was banking the money. I was managing to stand on my own 2 feet without any support structure in place. And it was wonderful. And I just share that as no amazing story, but probably the story of why my first master's degree was a degree in gerontology. And I go off to do this master's degree to Kiel, paying for it myself, going in my own time, not getting any study leave at all. Because nobody understood why I wanted to do a master's. "Why don't you just get another job?" they said. "No, I'd like to do a master's degree." "Why?" well, I think I'd like to learn about the exceptional care of older patients. And I arrive at Keele, and to my horror, discover after a couple of weeks that I'm actually on the gerontologist's programme. I'm on the doctor's programme, and they try to kick me off. Any guesses for what I said? I'm not going anywhere. And I completed the gerontology degree, which was for medicine, and they awarded it to me. I hadn't got a GMC number, I had an NMC number, and then within a few years I became a mentor for gerontologists going through that programme. Had it not been for this first ward in that grotty building, now replaced by this beautiful super hospital, I really would never have done that. And I move on. I go to New Cross Hospital, and I'm only choosing the highlights tonight because I did move through quite a few jobs. And I go to work on what was called a GP admissions unit. And the advert said, bright, enthusiastic, hard-working. You couldn't put that in an advert now, because if you put bright, they'd say, what? But they asked for all those things. And I thought, oh, it's got my name on it. I'll do that. So I applied for the job, and they said, we don't know what an admissions unit is. It's yours for grabs. Whoa. That's fun. And I don't know if any of you have heard of The Line of Duty. Any of you heard of The Line of Duty on television? Show of hands. Jed Mercurio. Brilliant. I worked with Jed Mercurio for 2 years. Jed Mercurio hated being a doctor. He hated the ground that he walked on while he was in the hospital. He moaned continuously, and he didn't want to be disturbed when he went to bed at night. And he said, Liz, if anyone comes in, there's a pile of x-ray forms there. I can feel the sign of and there's a pile of blood forms, and when they've had their x-rays and you've done the bloods, then you can call me, but I want you to batch them. I don't want to be woken up for one at a time. And however much you frown upon what I'm saying to you, that was the reality of the early admissions units. And so I learnt a lot there. I learnt a lot from Jed, despite his hatred. When he did his hatred of being a doctor, when he did his first TV programme, he came back in his Porsche. And he bought us all gifts. Fantastic. And so, Sutton Cottage Hospital. There's a big jump here. I've jumped about 5 or 6 years, and I decided to go off and do a leadership programme. I did the King's Fund leadership programme with 25 places for the whole country, and it taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about the way hospitals were run, the way people have prejudices about different professions, doctors and nurses, and it taught me a lot about how different healthcare systems around the world work. And I came back and worked at Sutton Cottage Hospital. And this is, still to this day, a Sutton Cottage Hospital. It's a small hospital, 2 wards if I remember rightly. And my first day there, the treasurer said, now look, you've got to be polite, nice, you've got to wear makeup, you've got to look good, because the people of Sutton Coldfield won't give us any money if you don't. And so they were quite a tight-knit community. They gave lots of money. In the picture there, I bought my first, well, I didn't buy it, a hospital bought it. I went and selected a new minibus. I had to do an options appraisal. What on earth is one of those? And I had to decide how many seats it would have. And I also had to radically change that hospital. That hospital was accepting patients 1 year that wanted a week of respite while the daughters and sons went on holiday, and then they booked themselves in for the following year. Excuse me? I changed it gradually through policy and practice into an intermediate care unit, and I went up to the local hospital, which is Good Hope, and I collected patients from Good Hope Hospital, and I had a ready waiting list for intermediate care to come into this hospital. It's the most wonderful job I've ever had for learning about pigeons and rats, and learning why the lifts don't work, and learning how infection control can possibly be effective when you can jump from bed to bed. I learnt a lot. And then I'd worked in the USA as well, briefly, on a secondment. Well, not secondment, actually, another fellowship. And gradually you can feel me moving my way through amassing nursing experience, and you're thinking, when's she going to mention research? Well, at this stage, I was in my naivety. I was thoroughly enjoying being a nurse. I was probably making quite a difference. But then I moved to this post, and this is where I mention research. And I started this post. I was known as a super nurse because Blair, who was in government at the time, called us all super nurses, and he also called us Blair's babes. not keen. And essentially, I'd rather be a super nurse than a Blair's babe. Do I look like anybody's babe? Absolutely not. You know, I didn't look like the cute and cuddly type. I was very much there, determined to do a job. I was an advanced practice nurse at this stage. I'd gone off and done another master's. I had done my prescribing. I was extremely proud of what I was building. Didn't really know what I was building, but I was a super nurse, and I was the first one in Birmingham. Again, I broke the mould. I was greedy. I wanted to do education, practice, research. I wanted to do leadership, service development. Why did I have to choose? Most people said, well, you could be a manager. Don't think so. You could go off and educate. Maybe. I wanted it all. And the consultant nurse job brought in by Professor Kim Manley, who's absolutely idolise the lady because she knows so much, she's done so much, and she's very quietly behind the scenes. And I gradually started to work through that thing called research. And this service, there's a lady sitting in the audience tonight who's just going to kill me. Janet, I'm so sorry. I'm not going to ask you to stand, but Janet Knight is here this evening. I've known you, Jan, haven't I, 20 years. And Jan and I set about setting up the first intravenous therapy service from the acute admissions unit in Birmingham. And I said to Jan, do you fancy expanding your role? Yeah. Sleeves rolled up, came in, trained other district nurses. We didn't have much fun with some district nurses, did we? They would literally give me a look of, I'm going to kill you, Liz. And that was because I'm not only changing the service, I'm changing their role. And we did an awful lot of research as the effectiveness of how long they stayed on the service, whether they were brought back in, whether they were readmitted. But you know, it wasn't even quasi-experimental, it was more service evaluation. But nevertheless, I was working in practice full time, and this was the first service in the whole of the Midlands. There were services in Oxford, people came up to see us. We didn't play very nicely, did we, Jan? We didn't tell them all our secrets. And we were developing satellite services for our pharmacological needs. We were getting nurses to do different practice, such as popping in drips in patients' homes. And Janet ran that service till she retired. I, at this point, had to hand it over because I was doing far too much in terms of the things. And I'm not going to go through each of these one by one. I'm just going to say that I've written 130 papers in my career. I'm now on to, this year, it will be my 4th book. 2 of those books I wrote while I was in practice. I wrote from practice. I wrote with colleagues, people that I wanted them to feel the love of being empowered in their job and delight in going to work. And here we've got developing patient assessments. I was developing venous thromboembolism assessments. I was developing frameworks to assess older people in the ED department, to name a few. I was also looking at nursing documentation, still a subject I'm very passionate about. And then there was this thing called weighing patients. I said to nurses, are you weighing the patients? No, we guess. What? We guess. How do you guess? Well, we ask the patient how heavy they think they are. Okay. How's that work? Well, they guess and we write it down. Right. Okay. So I decided to write a standard that all patients should be weighed on admission. How do you think that went down? Not great. And we lost many sets of scales. We couldn't keep the patients and their relatives, from licking the scales. So the excuse was that we would buy a load of weighing scales and they would walk. So me being me, I had them chained to the wall. And we bought new sets of scales. And the work that I did was to say, if I weigh 100 patients, which I did, and I asked them how heavy they are, the average discrepancy away from the actual true weight was 5 kilograms over or 5 kilograms under. And we were giving drugs on the basis of their weight. Really, really dangerous, especially some of the new drugs that we were giving. And so that work, however simple it might sound as an audit or a standard, it was changing practice. And then I heard a rumour that my name was Sister Scales around the hospital. And I didn't care. You know, I'd been Sister Sandwich prior to that in the A&E department, now Sister Scales. Didn't care. And so came on to another piece of work. This one was incredibly important. One weekend, an elderly lady came in. She had a stroke. She couldn't speak, aphasic. They thought she couldn't swallow. Baking hot day, wanted a drink. Okay, can't have a drink, we're going to put nil by mouth above your bed. This is a Friday afternoon. When do you think she got her swallowing assessment? Monday afternoon. And that was a typical picture of people coming in. So I went off and did what Liz does. I went and spoke to speech and language therapists who said, no, you can't do that. We use fluoroscopy, we've got these tubes. Hang on a minute. This patient has not had anything in the mouth apart from mouth care for days. And so through a process of wearing down the speech and language therapists, nothing against them, they're beautiful people, but through a process of wearing them down and being doggedly determined, they helped me to write a protocol. That protocol went national, so it was needed. And I was then able to write the training programme, and we were able to train all of the nurses in the hospital. Our time for weights for swallowing assessments went down from average of 35 hours to under an hour. There were many arguments whether it was the job of an A&E department to do that or whether it was the job of a acute medicine unit, and I just ignored them. I can be temporarily deaf when I choose. And so I move on here to talk to you very briefly and to canter through some of these. My expertise, as I'm known nationally and internationally, is patient discharge. That is, getting patients out of hospital in a timely manner so they can go home. They want to go home. We shouldn't be keeping them. And so I wrote the first national policy, which was a nurse-led policy with Sarah Mullally, the chief nurse for England. I rang her up. She wasn't used to being phoned up. And I said, I'd like to write a policy for nurse-led discharge. And I said, I'd like to write a policy for nurse-led discharge. Would you lead a group? So I led a group at Whitehall, still working full-time as a consultant nurse, to be able to write the first national policy to give permission for practice, which is for nurses for doctors to hand over and delegate to some of the nurses appropriate patients for discharge. I was really fired up. We had run records showing that patients were discharged earlier in the day, patients were more satisfied, they were able to get their services earlier in the evening rather than late at night. And I'm just going to literally roll through a few slides here. I then started to pump out the work, audit, service development, quasi experimental research, and then I had a moment of madness. Now, I've had several moments of madness throughout my career, this is just one, and I decided to get all of the colleagues that were working with me to write a chapter in my book. If I ever get friendly and say, can you write a chapter in a book, you have to send me packing, because I really mean it, I really want to get the book written. This had a first print run of, I think, along the lines of 50,000, and we sold all of the books, and then it had another print run. Obviously, it had its life. It was a basic book of practical procedures. So, this is how it is. I know this is a joke, but actually it's more real than you would want to believe. And this is the scene that we face every day, coming to no beds. We come into beds coming up too late in the day. We come up to queues in the A&E department, and it's all called flow. And we're not talking about a urology ward here, we're talking about patient flow. And so they used to squeal with delight when there was a bed empty, and nurses would go, bed 10's empty. Why is bed 10 empty? Oh, he's self-discharged. And the fact was, if there's an empty bed, it was an absolute delight, because we got a bed. And I said, well, that's really not very clever. And we realised how not clever it was when one day a 32-year-old gentleman left the department, having signed his self-discharge form, and promptly dropped dead. Because he'd chosen to go home, he felt well enough to go home, he believed he hadn't seen the doctor, he believed he felt better. Now, when you get a serious untoward incident like that, and you're a nurse working on a unit like this, you're very much responsible for finding out why and trying to ensure that that's really not going to happen again. So I did a big piece of work with a consultant on the unit at the time, Dr. Philip Dyer, someone else that I admire from the top of his head to the top of his toes. Absolutely terrific doctor. And we did the piece of work that said, well, do we know why people are going home? No, we just get them signed self-discharge. So we did an audit. And so for every self-discharge form, we handed a patient a letter. Could you tell us why you've chosen to self-discharge? out of an audit of 500 patients. Anybody got any guesses why they wanted to go home on Saturday morning? Boys? Not girls. Come on! Football! So the biggest reason for self-discharging was, I want to watch the footy, there isn't a telly, and I haven't seen a doctor, and they were men, Caucasian men, aged under 35. We had the gift of that information to change the service, and our service did change, and our self-discharge rate went down from 17% to 2%. And isn't that patient safety? Isn't that what we're about? So okay, it didn't crack the atom, but it was great. And then I had a second moment of madness, and I wrote my second book with all of my colleagues and put it out there, patient discharge, all the things I'd learned. And then a colleague of mine, Katie Dale, who shared an office with me, she said, "Now look, I'm having 6 months peace from you. I'm going to Australia." Great. She said, "I'm going to Darwin." She's quiet in Darwin. Within a week, she emailed me and she went, "I thought I'd got rid of you, and there's a copy of your book on the desk opposite to me." And I thought, bingo, I'm going round the world. So it was the most amazing feeling. And then I developed educational modules for the British Medical Journal. Sorry for any medical colleagues out there. It's my fault that you've had to do it. In fact, we have someone in our family who recently went, "Oh yeah, done your module." Great. She was a junior doctor. I smiled. And then I also wrote the national module for nurses, e-learning, and that was about nursing times. So I've done lots of bits and pieces. I've done lots of big pieces of work. And then I went to Ireland, and they said, "We'd like you to come and work over here. And we'd like your husband too." And that absolutely genuinely, paid for us to go over there for a weekend and try to placate us into going to work over there, because I've done a big piece of work in the Irish care homes sector to look at why patients are in care homes when they're actually going around giving out the tea. Surely patients deserve a bed in a care home when they've got needs. So this was a huge study of, in the end, 5 different care homes, and the offer of that came with a professor job, and I believe that was in 2012-13. And actually, I love the Irish. They are really great. They were fantastic with my husband and I, but it wasn't right for us. Now, any nurses in the audience from acute medicine, please shout now. There we go, wonderful, okay, I know you hate me, I'll just put your hands up. So I worked with the Society for Acute Medicine for over 7 years, whilst doing my day job, whilst writing my books, whilst trying to improve service. And I was working with a lady called Jan Christian, who's also in the audience, sorry, and she and I said, it's really hard for nurses working in acute medicine, because you're either an advanced practitioner, didn't we? Or, you're going around as a normal nurse. What's a normal nurse? And so can we describe what it looks like to work your way through practice? If we can describe that, maybe we'll retain more nurses. And the unit I worked on at the time in Birmingham had no waiting list. In other words, there was no one, we had no vacancies, I should say, not waiting list, I'm obsessed. But we had no vacancies. And we were very proud to tell them why we had no vacancies. And one of the reasons we had no vacancies was because I developed the only course in the whole country for acute medicine at the time, and nurses could get a certificate that they were an acute medicine nurse. And the problem was, before, they felt like Cinderella, and A&E was the king and the queen. And we were able, this is just 2 groups that went through, I could have put dozens of pictures up there, and there's me beautifully squashed in between the nurses there. This programme won a National Innovation Award, and was then, I know it's been used in Manchester, there's probably other people using it. And of course, I'm extremely proud of these things, but you move on, and I'm very guilty to keep moving on, and I don't always look back. And then I wrote 3 national documents to guide the workforce in acute medicine, to look at integrated competencies, which is now to our very able, where is she hiding, the nurse that's leading for acute medicine now, with Sam, is now very ably leading that, and Tash has been leading that as well. So what is beautiful, although I'm no longer the nurse rep, I couldn't possibly be the nurse rep, and we have to hand over to other people who want to follow in our shoes, and we'll do a much better job with WhatsApp, and we'll do a much better job than I did on learning about how to communicate with the younger population. And at the end of this, I was very surprised and utterly flabbergasted and truly honoured to receive, I think, only the second Lifetime Award for developing acute medicine staff in 2016. And it was really, why I felt honoured was because they were all doctors, and they were bestowing it on little old me, Lizzie. And that means that I get to be a very active member of the society, and that I'm able to go to all the conferences. I'm still able to go and give a talk. So I'm very proud to have received that on the list of doctors that are on the billboard as a nurse, having been put forward for that award. It's been a phenomenal amount of work. So, in my last 15 minutes, no one has gone to sleep. Fantastic. I'd like to just canter through a few slides to talk about my PhD, and not to say too much about it, because as my husband will tell you, it's very boring. And he developed the art of procrastination and Sudoku. Sorry. And he said to me, just get it done. Okay. I was on a fast-track PhD. I won an NIHR clinical doctoral fellowship for over £250,000, and my husband going, get it done! And it's really, really hard to get it done, because there's always plenty better things to do. You know, there's the housework to do, there's the ironing to do, there's probably another book to do, and I really found it was like sticking pins in my eyes. And one of my students sent that through to me when I'd done supervision, obviously not done a very good job for her, Emma, and I thought it was brilliant, because I thought that's exactly how I used to feel. If anybody asked me how it was going, I'd go, it's all under control, it's fine. And then my final viva at the University of Manchester was with Professor Kim Manley, the lady that had invented consultant nurses, my absolute hero. I was in and out of the room in 20 minutes flat on the next train home, and that was because I had minor, very, very minor corrections, and unfortunately having to wait a year nearly for an examiner meant that it was awarded at the end of 2018. I got it done. And, you know, that then said, well, you can't stop now. And I've got my publications coming out from this. My publications were all about discharge planning. I had 6 publications from my PhD, not a book, and these are some of them here. And then there's another lady in the audience, and I know she's hiding, I know where she is, I can see you. And Professor Annie Topping, thank you. Professor Annie Topping said, what are you doing now, Liz? I went, oh, having a rest. No, you're not. You're going to do a postdoc. What? You're going to do a postdoc? No. And she took me through the University of Birmingham, guiding me through the process of where I could do a postdoc, writing up more papers, deciding how to frame my career and really start to take quite a strong hold of patient discharge practice. And so thank you, Annie, for guiding me through, kicking and screaming, a postdoc interview when I hadn't even finished my doctoral, because I hadn't, the two overlapped. She said, you'll get it. Why are you worried? And then I started to look at a new global review. NHS England kindly approached me and said, would you do some evidence searching? I said, well, yeah, but there has to be a contract. We have to work together. And they did. They were absolutely fabulous. They worked with me, and I produced, with a lady called Jane Robinson, the first global review of criteria-led discharge to look at, is it safe? Can we do it? Is it effective? Should we bother with it? Should we forget it? And then I worked through actually processes and procedures to make that work, and did a feasibility study at ward level. And I thought, with my husband's help, we got the most wonderful name for the project. Sat there one day and said, what can I call it? And we came up with SPEED, because everything is about speeding things up, and it means selecting patients for efficient and effective discharge. And so that's another huge piece of work, and it showed that actually could bring the time of discharge down if it were implemented effectively and if it was sustained to lunchtime for most patients. And then I produced 2 more documents which were all about, within NHS England again, about toolkits for implementing. And then I went off and did quite a few talks. And then Annie knocked on my door again. And she said, well, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm a consultant nurse. I have a PhD. I don't really have a home to go to. I'm here. I do my research. I'm very happy. I'll carry on. And she said, well, there's this thing come out called the National Institute for Healthcare Research 70 at 70. And we have another 70 at 70, or 2 actually 70 at 70 staff. So there are 3 of the 70 members here, and you've got to have a bit of pluck because it's a national senior leadership programme. You're out there with the good and great, and my goodness me, did I feel like an imposter. Be like, what am I doing here? But I learned from these beautiful people that we could do some very great things about capacity and capability development in the workforce for those people that aspire to be, like me, a clinical academic. And then it was the end of an era, and this beautiful message came across my social media. I had my leaving do, and I was off to new pastures. Now, the only mistake that was made was, whilst they very well equipped me in Birmingham, was once they opened that door, and there was no job, in other words, in Birmingham, because it just wasn't, I walked through the door and came to Coventry. So thank you. Now, we're now on to my, I think, very brave move of defecting from Birmingham and coming to Coventry, to the Centre for Care Excellence. I came to Coventry because it felt like a home to go to, where clinical academics were understood, where the aspiration was to improve patient care, and where I felt I could start to really learn the ropes of being less of an imposter. There's nothing worse on a unit when people say, why do you do research, Liz? Why do you do it? And it makes you want to cry when you've gone through the pain of doing a PhD and nobody quite gets you. And I came home here, so hello Coventry. And I have 3 programmes of research now. They are relatively early stage research. Kerry, I make no excuses, there's a long way to go. You've got a lot of work to do to get this set up when you move to a new environment. I've still got this thing called criteria-led discharge where nurses take more responsibility. But there are 2 other programmes of research that I have, and I'm going to very quickly canter through those, and it could not be more timely, one of those programmes. So, just a word here. I'm not a great girl on quotes, but I like this quote because it's me. In the very topography of professional practice, there's the high, hard ground where practitioners can make effective use of research-based theory and technique. And then there is the swampy lowland, where situations are confusing messes, hello acute medicine, incapable of technical solution. And the difficulty is that the problems of the high ground, however great their technical interest, are relatively unimportant to the clients or the larger society, while in the swamp, the problems are of greatest human concern. I spent my life in the swamp. In that swamp, I would like now to ask to stand the following people. Dana Samet, they have been pre-warned. Dana Samet, thank you Dana. Dana is my PhD student. She's now approaching her 3rd year. She is studying patient-perpetrated violence, in a hospital setting at the moment, and doing an absolutely fabulous job. Thank you, Dana. Could I ask Dr. Bushra Zaidi to stand up for me? Hello, Bushra. She is an international doctor, joined us over from Pakistan. You're about to go into your, we were on 2nd, 3rd year. And she's studying with me criteria-led discharge, PhD student. Thank you, Bushra. Emma Brangwyn, hate me as much as you will. Stand up, please. Senior physiotherapist. I'm very proud of the programme of work that Emma's got underway. And the lady next to her, Roz, working on criteria-led discharge. And we all sit there sometimes and think, what are we doing? But Emma is doing a brilliant job of breaking new ground. Thank you, Emma. Bethany Hall, if you're here, can I ask you to stand? Thank you, Beth. Beth is my 4th PhD student, and she is studying professional nurse advocates, which are here to look at the recruitment, the retention, resilience, restoration of nurses post-COVID, because an awful lot of nurses chose to walk and retire, and a lot of us were very burnt out. Thank you. And last but by no means least, my 5th PhD student, Jo. Thank you very much for standing up. And Jo Jennings is here as an assistant professor working at Coventry University, physiotherapist, and we're looking at patient discharge and assessment and lots of things, aren't we, Jo? Thank you. This is the future. My students are the future. They are the future programmes, our future investment. I'm just the vehicle by which they travel and get there. My research journey is here, in brief, and I'm now reaching towards I am hoping a huge programme development grant, and with the help of my colleagues in the Centre for Care Excellence, and going through that, Professor Rosie Neefsey, Kerry Jones, Emma Murphy, David McWilliams, Gordon, and Professor Jane Code, and with the help of my colleagues, helping to unpick a mess at our last team meeting and understand which way I need to go, because I'm still in the messy swamp. So I'm aiming at the big impact, I'm aiming at the big money. And a piece of work that we're doing with NHS Midlands is doing exactly that. And a new impact report has just come out. I have not written it. It has been done with a group of able colleagues. But to look at the work that we've done together and to say, what is the impact of that? And impact is hugely important to the university, because if you do things and you don't know if they've made any difference whatsoever, then how can you prove impact and prove travel? And so we've done that big piece of work meticulously with the, I'm terrible at remembering their name, Health Innovation East Midlands, and we've yet to unpick that, so watch this space. And not many people, as Ros and I and the various people involved in that would do that, actually say, did the piece of work we did in speed, and did the massive point prevalence study that Liz and Ros do across 22 hospitals here in Midlands, did it make any difference? And then we go back to Dana's work, and it could not be more timely. No, we don't go back to Dana's work, I would go to Emma's work, and Emma is going through the phases of her research at the moment. And then, the most dreadful thing has happened recently. If you don't watch the news, I'm going to tell you what's happened. And that is where a nurse in her 50s, the same as me, barely hanging on, but I'm in my 50s, and she's got stabbed. And she's been stabbed whilst on duty in an acute medicine unit. She has life-changing injuries. She may never go back to work. She's in Oldham. It is absolutely despicable. And there is absolutely no better time to showcase the work that Dana is doing in the field that she's doing in, either pre-violence, during the act of violence, helping staff after violence. And therefore the outputs from her work stream, bearing in mind she's further ahead than some of my PhD students, she's done 2 global pieces of work, and one of them is the most downloaded for that journal, something like 12,500 times. And we're looking at bringing in a new screening tool with colleagues. I always say we because there's so many people involved in research, and these are massive studies. And then I'm heading towards the end now, about 2 slides left, but 2 important slides, 2 or 3. And this is a piece of work I did with Professor Rosie Neefsey and a huge team of researchers in the first year I was here. It was just a fabulous team to work with, and we looked at the effectiveness, we evaluated that professional nurse advocate programme. People, what's a PNA? You know, they're out there are thousands and thousands, like 10 or 11,000 of them now, out in the workforce, there to protect, nurture and work with nurses who might otherwise leave. And one of the things we heard from our research work, had it not been for some of the PNAs immediately post-COVID, and I suffered very badly with COVID at the time as well, I know what it felt like to be on the receiving end of care, and I know a lot of us did, but it really sits with you when you realise you're trying to help those nurses recover. And nurses were saying to us, had it not been for the PNAs, we would not have stayed in practice. And that report now has been downloaded some 4,500 times. And this is just a lovely picture of us at Warwickshire, Daisy, I've gone too fast, at one of the latest conferences we ran. I was in my element, a room of about 100 PNAs there from around the country to come and listen to our research. And then very recently we are putting a grant together with Birmingham University with the social care school, and it's looking at the gaps in care after patients go home and what is the cost of that, and we're putting that in for the 7th of March. And Tracy, chief nurse at the University Hospitals, last but by no means least, flying the kite for Coventry. We are driving excellence, and Michelle Hartanto, who's sitting there, who led a team of researchers that are all here this evening to support me. And we looked at the characteristics of excellence in nursing. We did not just look at this from a hospital perspective, we looked at it system-wide, to drive system-wide change, and to be real pace setters, because we're saying, has this been defined before, what excellence is in nursing? No, it hasn't. It's been defined in America in a very specific group. So we're really hoping that that work has some travel and can make some impact for our patients and our nurses. And before I give my thanks this evening for you all being here, I'd like to tell you that I do like a bit of playing, tripping around. And last year, my husband and I, his first year of retirement, we travelled to 5 different countries. But I am known, even on a honeymoon, to build in a bit of teaching because, you know, if they'll give me a flight, am I not Mr. Deutsch? I decided to go and teach in Australia, and that was my first trip. And then I was invited to go and to teach in Vancouver, in Canada, and absolutely marvellous. And then Kuala Lumpur and Singapore and Ireland, and I'm going to forget all the countries. And so there is global spread, there is uptake, there is impact. Always hard to prove the impact, but there is impact. And I think really that's where I want to draw a close. And I want to say that, go back to what I asked you quite a few slides ago. What were you thinking about 37 years ago? What did you do? What were your decisions? You just heard my 37 years. In 37 years' time, I won't be here unless I have a very long life. If I am here, I might be receiving care. It's extremely important to me that the people of tomorrow, both the researchers and those of us that will receive care as we go through life, receive the best evidence care. And that's what I stand for. I have 2 thanks here this evening. My husband will be going to kill me later. If you don't see me for a while, I apologise. John worked, I think, for around about 42 years in the NHS as an eye surgeon. His staff loved him. I love him. He's been an absolute strength, a tower behind me. And if he were not behind me, I wouldn't care about Centre for Care Excellence. I wouldn't be here. So the Centre for Care Excellence can celebrate me and my colleagues because my husband is in the background supporting me to be me. And then my last thanks, and I'll try and hold it together. I'd like to thank my foster dad who died about 5 years ago. He lived till he was 90. And I'd like to say thank you, Dad. I dedicate this lecture. That's it. Thank you very much this evening.